When you reach 75, people start talking to you like your ears don't work and your mind doesn't matter. That's what my son did the night. He told me I wouldn't be going with them. We were sitting at the dining table. The same table where I'd fed him as a boy, where Arthur and I used to laugh over Sunday dinners. The candles were lit, the house smelled faintly of roast chicken, and for a moment, it almost felt like family again. Then David cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, his tone too careful. "We've been meaning to talk to you about the trip." My heart fluttered with something warm, excitement maybe. I'd always wanted to see Europe again. To walk the streets of Paris like I did once when Arthur was alive. I'd even pulled out my old suitcase that morning, wiping the dust off the handle. But the look in his eyes made my stomach tighten. Lydia, my daughter-in-law, reached across the table, resting her manicured hand on mine. "We were thinking," she said. "It might be too hard for you to travel. The flights are long, there's a lot of walking. We just don't want you to feel uncomfortable." "Too hard. Too uncomfortable. Too old." David nodded. "You'd have a better time here, Mom. You can watch the house while we're gone. It'll give you something to do." I blinked, feeling something twist inside me. "Watch the house?" I repeated, as if the words were foreign. "Yes," Lydia said brightly. "You could water the plants, feed the cat, maybe tidy up a bit. You love keeping busy." They smiled, two polite, guilty smiles, as if they were offering me a gift. I forced my own smile, though my throat burned. "Of course," I said softly. "I'll take care of everything." They both exhaled in relief, mistaking my composure for agreement. David started talking about his itinerary, the tours, the fancy hotel by the Eiffel Tower. Lydia laughed at something one of the kids said. The sound of their happiness filled the room, but it didn't reach me. I felt invisible. After dinner, I cleared the plates alone while they packed upstairs. The clinking of the dishes echoed in the empty kitchen. My reflection in the window looked tired. Pale hair, lined face, soft hands that had cooked, cleaned, and comforted everyone but myself. Arthur's picture sat on the counter beside the sink, his smile forever gentle, forever gone. "They don't mean harm," I whispered to his frame. "They just think I'm old." But the truth scraped harder than that. They didn't think I was capable. To them, I was no longer a person with dreams or strength. I was just a caretaker of their past. Later that night, after the laughter faded upstairs, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table. The clock ticked steadily. The house smelled faintly of detergent and silence. That's when I saw them, 4 first-class plane tickets sitting on the counter, half tucked under an envelope. My eyes caught the golden edges, the printed words, "Paris, France." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I reached out, tracing the names printed in bold letters: David Lawson, Lydia Lawson, Emma Lawson, and James Lawson. My name wasn't there. The room suddenly felt colder. I sank into a chair, the tickets trembling in my hand. They hadn't forgotten to include me. They'd decided not to. I looked at Arthur's picture again. "Would you believe it?" I murmured. "They think I'm too old to live a little." I laughed then. A small, broken sound that didn't reach my eyes. But behind that laugh, something shifted. A tiny spark that had been buried under years of patience and quiet obedience. I didn't know it then, but that spark was the beginning of everything. Because by morning, I would no longer be the woman who was left behind. I would be the woman who left them speechless. I didn't sleep that night. The clock's ticking became the only sound in the house, sharp and rhythmic like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I sat in my chair by the window, the tickets still on the table beside me, mocking me with their golden sheen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my family's faces, smiling, relieved, free. Free of me. I told myself I shouldn't be surprised. Life had a way of erasing old women quietly, as if our usefulness expired the moment we stopped being needed. But knowing that didn't make the ache in my chest any softer. At around 4 in the morning, I made myself tea black, strong, the way Arthur used to like it. I sat at the kitchen table, his photo watching over me, and said aloud, "They're leaving tomorrow." My voice sounded foreign in the empty room. Arthur's frame glinted in the low light. And I remembered his voice, deep, steady, full of that gentle mischief that had once carried me through life. "Evelyn," he used to say. Don't you ever let anyone decide when your story ends. For so many years, I had let people write my endings, neighbors, doctors, my own son. Mom, you shouldn't drive anymore. Mom, you shouldn't live alone. Mom, it's too cold for you to go out. I had obeyed every time, quietly folding away another piece of my independence, like an old sweater no one wanted anymore. But as I stared at those tickets, something stirred deep inside me. A stubborn, familiar fire. The one I thought I'd lost the day Arthur was lowered into the ground. Why should they get to tell me what I could or couldn't do? I was 75, not invisible. The decision came quietly, like a whisper from my past. Go. I didn't need their permission. I didn't even need their company. I just needed to remember who I used to be. A woman who once boarded a train with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Who fell in love in the rain on a cobblestone street. I reached for the tickets again, smoothing the edges. My eyes caught the airline's name. I could call. I could find a way. So I did. At 7:15 a.m., I dialed the airline number and spoke to a kind young woman named Maria. Good morning, ma'am. How may I help you today? I hesitated only a second. I need a seat, I said. On the same flight to Paris as my family. First class. Maria checked. We still have availability, Mrs. Lawson. Would you like to be seated near them? I smiled to myself, imagining David's face when he saw me. No, dear, I said gently. I think I'd prefer a little distance. When I hung up, I felt lightheaded. Nervous, yes, but alive. My heart beat with a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I packed slowly, carefully. My blue suitcase from the 1970s, the one I'd carried on my honeymoon, still sat in the attic. I wiped the dust off its brass clasp and began filling it. 2 dresses, a scarf Arthur bought me from Florence, my passport, and the little silver locket with our picture inside. By the time the sun rose, my decision was made. I left a note on the kitchen table. House in good hands. Don't worry. Love, Mom. Then I called a cab. The air outside was crisp, smelling faintly of rain and freedom. As the car pulled away, I looked back once at the house I'd spent most of my life in. Walls that had witnessed love, loss, and now liberation. When I reached the airport, the sight of it made my throat tighten. All those glowing signs, the hum of engines, the smell of coffee and possibility. And there they were, my family, standing in line at the counter, David holding his passport, Lydia scrolling on her phone. I stayed back, hidden by the crowd, watching them. When the airline clerk asked for their tickets, I saw David's face fall. He turned to Lydia. The envelope, he whispered. Her eyes widened. I thought you had it. A ripple of panic crossed their perfect little faces. That's when I stepped forward, the tickets in hand. Looking for these. Their heads whipped around. Lydia's jaw dropped. David just stared. Mom, he stammered. What are you doing here? I smiled, calm and steady. You left these behind, I said, handing them over. And I thought I might join you. Since someone needs to make sure you don't forget anything else. Before they could speak, I turned and walked toward security, my blue suitcase rolling behind me. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't following anyone's path. I was carving my own. When the plane lifted off the runway, I felt the ground, and my old life, fall away beneath me. It had been decades since I'd last flown. Yet the sound of the engine stirred something deep and familiar inside me. I pressed my hand against the window, watching the city shrink into a maze of glittering lights. Somewhere down there, I had spent years folding laundry, baking birthday cakes, waiting for calls that never came. Now, for the first time in a long time, the waiting was over. I was going somewhere for myself. David and his family sat several rows ahead, though I hadn't chosen to look at them much. I could imagine the looks, Lydia whispering in disbelief, David glancing back occasionally. Too embarrassed to cause a scene in front of other passengers. I had spent a lifetime keeping peace. They could sit in their discomfort for once. The flight attendants were kind. One of them, a young man named Elliot, smiled warmly as he handed me tea. Traveling alone, ma'am? He asked politely. Yes, I said, smiling back. For the first time in years. He nodded, as if he understood something unspoken. Then I hope it's a wonderful trip. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the warmth. The hum of the plane was like a lullaby, soft and steady. I glanced at the sleeping passengers around me and felt an unfamiliar calm wash over me. Not the tired, empty kind that comes with age, but the peaceful sort that comes when you finally make your own choices. When I landed in Paris, the morning sun spilled through the airport windows, painting the marble floors gold. The air smelled faintly of espresso and perfume. For a moment, I just stood there, soaking it all in. The noise, the beauty, the feeling of being small and free in a world that still had room for me. David's voice broke through the crowd. "Mom," he called, half exasperated, half bewildered. "You actually came?" I turned to him, pulling my suitcase upright. "Of course, dear. You told me to watch the house, but it seemed rather dull. I decided to watch the Eiffel Tower instead." Lydia's lips parted, but no words came out. The grandchildren avoided my eyes, pretending to be fascinated by their phones. I smiled sweetly. "You don't have to worry about me. I've already booked my own hotel." David blinked. "Your own hotel? Mom, you can't just." "I can," I said softly but firmly. I did. And before he could protest, I turned and walked toward the taxi stand, my suitcase wheels clicking against the tiles like applause. My hotel was a few streets away from the Seine, a small but elegant place called Hotel Montclair, with ivy climbing its stone walls and flower boxes on every window. The manager, a kind woman named Claudine, greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome to Paris, Madame Lawson," she said. "Are you here for vacation?" I thought about the word vacation. It didn't feel right. This was something deeper, a rebirth perhaps. "I'm here," I said, "to remember who I am." The suite was lovely, a balcony overlooking the river, a vase of lilies on the table, sunlight spilling across the floor. I opened the curtains wide and stepped out, breathing in the cool Paris air. Below me, people laughed, music drifted from a cafe, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Over the next few days, I wandered the city alone. I visited the Musée d'Orsay, sat beneath the Eiffel Tower with a croissant and coffee, and watched the boats drift lazily down the Seine. I spoke to strangers, took photos, and wrote little notes in a journal I'd bought from a street vendor. Evelyn Lawson, 75 years young, alive in Paris. Each word felt like a small act of rebellion. Then one evening, as I walked through the Tuileries garden, I saw my family in the distance. They were arguing. Lydia waving her arms, David rubbing his temples, the children sulking. I stood behind a row of trees and watched them for a moment. Once, seeing them unhappy would have broken my heart. But now, I only felt calm. They were learning something I already knew. That control is a fragile illusion, and taking someone for granted always has a price. As I walked back toward my hotel, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Harrington, my late husband's lawyer. The subject line read, "Regarding the property transfer, confirmation attached." My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. The sale had gone through. The house, the one they'd asked me to watch, was no longer ours. It was mine no more either. It was gone. Sold. Final. I smiled to myself as the Paris lights shimmered across the river. My son thought he'd left me behind. But it turned out I'd already moved on, further than he could ever imagine. Tomorrow, I would write the letter that would change everything. 2 weeks later, I watched the sun rise over the Paris rooftops, the city glowing in soft gold. I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread and rain. My suitcase was by the door again, lighter this time. I had come here carrying sadness, but I was leaving with something far more valuable. Freedom. I had spent the last days exploring every corner of the city Arthur once promised we'd see together. I visited the bridge where he'd proposed, still standing proud after all these years. I left a single white rose on its stone ledge and whispered, "I finally did it, love. I finally lived again." That evening, I wrote the letter, not out of anger, but out of truth. I wanted my family to understand what they had done, and what I had reclaimed. My dearest David, I hope Paris was everything you dreamed of. Et truly do. You once told me I was too old to travel, too frail to keep up. But while you were walking the streets of Paris, I was walking them too, just not beside you. I saw the art, the river, the sunlight you thought I couldn't handle. I met people who looked at me and saw a woman, not a burden. I remembered who I was before I became mom and grandma. I've sold the house. It was in my name, always was. The money has been placed in my account. And I've set aside funds for Emma and James' education. The rest I intend to use to see the world Arthur and I once dreamed of. Italy, Greece, maybe even Japan. Don't be angry. This isn't punishment. This is simply balance, me taking back the years I gave away. With love. Mom. P.S. You said I was too old to travel. Turns out I was just too old to be ignored. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in an envelope, and gave it to the hotel clerk. Please have this mailed to the United States tomorrow, I said. She smiled and nodded. When my plane landed back home a few days later, I didn't go to my old address. I went instead to a small seaside cottage I'd rented months ago, one Arthur and I had visited on our honeymoon. It was quiet there, peaceful, a place that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. 2 days later, I received a call. Mom. David's voice cracked, thin and unsure. I said nothing for a moment. Let him feel the silence he'd left me with. Mom, what did you do? He asked, his voice trembling. The house, the locks, everything's gone. There's a sold sign. Lydia's furious. You can't just. Oh, but I could, I said gently. And I did. He stammered something about unfairness, about family, about how could I do this after everything. I smiled softly, watching the waves crash against the shore. After everything? I repeated. David, I gave you everything. My youth, my home, my love. All I took back was what was already mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear him breathing, angry and confused, but beneath it, I sensed something else, shame. He whispered. You really went to Paris? Yes, I said. And it was beautiful. Then I ended the call. That night, I walked along the beach barefoot, the sand cool beneath my feet. The moon shimmered across the water like a silver ribbon, and I felt Arthur there beside me, not as a ghost, but as a memory finally set free. I thought about revenge, how people imagine it as something loud, burning, destructive. But the sweetest revenge, I had learned, was quiet. It was the sound of your own footsteps walking away, steady and certain. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Somewhere across the ocean, my son stood in front of an empty house, holding a letter he would never forget. And somewhere here, a 75-year-old woman smiled at the stars, finally living the life everyone said she was too old to dream of. Evelyn Lawson had been left behind, but in the end, she was the one who moved forward.